Well, Oregon football's got some great weaponry going into this fall, but could they do something that's never been done before in program history? Maybe, but it depends on Will Stein. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today has got more mailbag questions, just like I've been telling you. You send me your questions. They always make it into the show because we got plenty of shows to do. And this is a fascinating one here from Mr. Eddie the Dog, who, by the way, is in a running daily competition with Eric on YouTube. They're everydayers out there to be the first comment on YouTube. I mean, every day I wake up and I'm like, oh boy, I wonder who got to it first. Sometimes Eric goes out and I mean, these are just like the diehard of diehard fans of this show, which I greatly appreciate. But they are out there absolutely grinding to be the first comment every day. Sometimes Eric goes before the show premieres. Whew, it's dedication right there. I appreciate it. All right, this question from Mr. Eddie the Dog. Hey, Spencer, can we have two 1,000-yard receivers this year? This is a fascinating question to look at. So Oregon hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiver, just a single 1,000-yard receiver since 2018. And prior to that, by the way, can you name the guy who was the previous most recent 1,000-yard receiver? I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Byron Marshall in 2014. The year prior, he led the Ducks in rushing and is the poster child for the ability to move from one position to another seamlessly. He went from leading rusher to leading receiver. It was pretty darn impressive. But I went through into the statistical archives and I found something quite interesting. The last time Oregon had two 1,000-yard receivers was never, because it hasn't happened. Now, Oregon football statistical records only go back to 2006. But seeing as how college football and football in general as a sport throws the ball more than they ever have before, you have more dynamic offenses, you have better quarterback play. If it hasn't happened from 2006 until now, I think we can safely assume and just say with 99% certainty that it didn't happen in the years prior to that. Going back to the days when Oregon was under center all the time, not throwing it as much. Oregon actually has been a very run-heavy team over really the last 15 years or so, but they've had some great quarterback play, as we all know. So this is something that's never happened before, Oregon having two 1,000-yard receivers. But do they have, and also one more note, they came kind of close in 2013. Josh Huff led the team in receiving yards with over 1,100, and Braylon Addison was just under 900. That's the closest Oregon has ever come. Now, Troy Franklin had just over 890 yards this past season for the Ducks. I think he could certainly be a 1,000-yard receiver, right? If you're talking about the receiving core, which as we discussed on yesterday's show, go check it out if you missed it, to go through the comparison of where Oregon's weapons stack up compared to the other best offensive repertoires in the league. They're right there with USC and Washington. I think one below USC, one above Washington when you factor in tight ends and running backs, though Washington's probably got the superior receiving core if you're just going top three there. But if you look at Oregon's weapons here and say, okay, if you're going to have two 1,000-yard receivers in one single season, who's going to be one of them? Troy Franklin is the easy one. But then who would the next guy be is a fascinating question, because I could go in several different directions there. I don't think Gary Bryant Jr. would get into the mix because I don't think that he's going to be one of Oregon's top two kind of Z receivers opposite Troy Franklin, who's in the X slot. I think that's going to be Trayshawn Holden. So if you're whittling it down, you're probably not going to have a tight end get there. That just about never happens. In fact, I doubt that's ever happened for Oregon. I wonder if I'm sure there's been a season in which a tight end has eclipsed 1,000 receiving yards. I didn't look that up prior to recording the show, but some of you internet sleuths out there can certainly help me in that department and drop in the YouTube comments. But it's really, really hard for a tight end to do because he's blocking half the time and running routes half the time. So the next most likely candidate to have 1,000-yard season, I think instinctually for me would be Trayshawn Holden. Now, it doesn't mean he's the only candidate, but he'd be the most likely one. Because I think as you look at Oregon's receiving depth chart post-spring, I think it's pretty similar to what you had going into the spring. And before the spring game, my projected two deep for Oregon's receiving core was Franklin and Casper at the X, Holden and then Dickey at the Z. That's maybe now Gary Bryant Jr. and maybe Dickey's working his way back from injury, or maybe Dickey surpasses Casper. I don't know. He could go basically anywhere. And then Tez Johnson and Chris Hudson splitting time in the slot. So that's where it gets kind of tricky here is I think Tez Johnson or Trayshawn Holden could be that sort of guy. Like I've been a big Chris Hudson fan. I will continue to be a big Chris Hudson fan. I don't think he's the sort of guy that could necessarily go for 1,000-yard season, but I love his toughness. I love his physicality. The production has been there. He was Oregon's second leading receiver a year ago, but he doesn't quite have the high-end speed that a Tez Johnson has or the physical size like a Troy Franklin or a Trayshawn Holden have. So I think if it were going to be somebody other than Franklin to have a 1,000-yard season, the answer would be Trayshawn Holden. I could hear the argument for Tez Johnson because he is a special athlete. He is small, but he's ridiculously fast. That touchdown he broke off in the spring game, we just haven't seen that many athletes like that at Oregon. But then the question I'd ask with Tez Johnson and whether or not he could start to encroach on a 1,000-yard season is he going to be able to get the touches within the offense? Because I don't even know if he's the full-time starter at the slot receiver position. Now, maybe he plays outside. He played outside a decent amount in the spring game. So did Hudson, by the way. But it depends on personnel, depends on matchups. And that's why in my open of the show, I talked about Will Stein, because that's ultimately what it comes down to is the philosophy matters as much as the actual players. Are Trayshawn Holden or Tez Johnson or heck, even Chris Hudson good enough in the right offense to produce a 1,000-yard season? Yes, we know Troy Franklin is, even though he hasn't done it yet. Like, it's pretty clear that guy has that sort of potential. But so when you look around the Pac-12, there aren't that many teams that accomplish this very often. Washington did it a season ago. Washington, that had the leading passer in the country in Michael Penix behind center, and he had Jalen McMillan go over 1,000 yards and Roma Dunze go over 1,000 yards. So I look at those guys and say, yeah, I think Trayshawn Holden and Troy Franklin are probably the best comparison to those two. But Stein is ultimately going to determine whether or not they could see enough touches for that. And I don't think it's impossible here. I don't think it's likely, but I don't think it's impossible. I do, however, think it's likely that if you go by Bird Dog shorts, you're going to look back and say, wow, that was a really, really good decision, because summer is here in some places, close to arriving in others, and Bird Dogs are the perfect shorts for everything that you need. You can go for a swim. You can go out and hang with friends. You can go play on the lawn, have a barbecue, go to a golf course, wherever. Bird Dog shorts have got all the versatility that you need. They fit you great. They are super comfortable. They fit really, really nice around the waist. They make your legs look good, and they're just comfier, more versatile than a lot of other shorts. So go get your next pair at birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. When you go there, enter promo code LockedOnCollege, all one word, because they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. Again, comfort, versatility, style, they've got it all. birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Get that free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every single order. All right, let's continue. So whether or not Oregon could actually accomplish this feat depends on Will Stein, because Stein, as the offensive coordinator and play caller, is ultimately going to determine how often you could even have enough receivers on the field. So Washington a season ago, they didn't run a whole lot of two tight end sets. They didn't put two running backs on the field very often. They were a very 11 personnel based team, and they threw the ball a lot more than Oregon did. And their passing offense was more productive. Oregon's running offense was more productive. So that's what kind of factors in here to this original question. Now, do they have two guys talented enough? Like are Troy Franklin, Trayshawn Franklin and Troy Holden. Interesting. New players for the Ducks. Trayshawn Franklin and Troy Holden. Are Troy Franklin and Trayshawn Holden individually talented enough to be a part of a pass-happy offense and have that level of production this year? I think the answer to that question is unequivocally yes. However, though Will Stein is no stranger to throwing the football, Frank Harris at UTSA last year was one of the most productive quarterbacks in the country. I'm pretty sure he was top 10 or 15 in passing yards by the time the season came to an end. They ran a lot of 11 personnel. That might have been personnel based because they didn't feel like they had a number 2 and 3 tight end that they could go to regularly the way the Ducks did a season ago. But who knows how they're going to feel about the tight end room. I know they've brought in a number of guys, but maybe they feel like, it's kind of Terrence Ferguson, and then there's a drop off there. Maybe Will Stein wants to put more wide receivers on the field. He certainly, from what I've been able to discern, put 3 wideouts on the field more than the Ducks did a season ago. They didn't really do it. Oregon didn't do that very often. It's not that they never did it, but you also rarely had an instance in which you had more than 3 receivers on the field, whereas 4 or 5. I don't think they ever put 5 receivers on the field. They might have done 4 a couple of times, but it was primarily two receiver sets, maybe 3, but they like to incorporate the tight ends and the running backs in the passing game as well. So Will Stein has a certain level of creative freedom there, and maybe he wants to throw the ball more than Kenny Dillingham did, right? That was still, for all our gripes about Mario Cristobal and running the ball too much in 2021 and not throwing it down the field, which I agree with, by the way, this was still a run-based offensive attack in 2022. The difference is that we had an explosive down the field play action passing game, and we had the personnel and the quarterback and the offensive coordinator to be able to execute that. So I think all that is possible, but I do feel that even though Lanning comes from the defensive side of the ball, he still has input and influence on what happens offensively, right? I don't think Lanning is a Chip Kelly type circa 2010, where I heard reports back then that, Chip Kelly never even went to defensive meetings, just literally left the defensive staff to their own accords. Now, have I confirmed that myself? No. But would I believe that? Yeah, because that's just not really Chip's MO. And Lincoln Riley's the same sort of thing, which is why that defensive coordinator hire is so important for both of them. So I think Lanning does have some say here in the offense, especially since he's not the defensive play caller. I think he is very much a CEO head coach where he's saying, okay, this is what we want to be doing here. Here's where we want to do that. He's not necessarily getting on there and calling offensive plays because he's never done that before. But does he have input in the philosophy, the game plan, approach, and style? Yeah, absolutely. So that offense we saw a year ago, yes, it was Kenny Dillingham's, but Dan Lanning had his fingerprints on it as well. So I don't think Will Stein is going to come in and just completely change the offense. He's indicated as much to the point where you could see 2,000-yard receivers. Now, at the end of the day, is that important? Not necessarily, right? Like it's an interesting stat for sure. And we haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver by the time this fall kicks off in 5 years. And we've only had, a handful over the last decade and change in an era where everybody's throwing the football. But the other thing, too, is I don't know that Oregon needs to have two 1,000-yard receivers, right? It'd be the sign of a highly productive passing offense. I'm on board with that. But did anyone feel like the passing game didn't quite reach its full potential, or anything offensively didn't reach its full potential a year ago? I didn't, right? Aside from red zone mistakes. So I don't think they need to have that per se. They have the guys talented enough to do so, but I think the coaching dynamics are going to play out in such a way that I don't expect that to happen this season. Plus, with the volume of talent you've got in that room, I don't think Bo Nix is going to be locked onto one target all the time, which is great. I mean, Troy Franklin's going to be the number 1 receiver. We know that. But he seems to really like Trayshawn Holden based on what we saw in the spring game. We know he likes Terrence Ferguson. We know he can get the ball to Chris Hudson. And we know he's going to have chemistry with Tez Johnson, his brother. And now he's got Gary Bryant Jr. in there. So I think he's got plenty of weapons. I think they can produce at a high level in the passing game without having 2,000-yard receivers. But I was fascinated by that dive into, what Oregon's passing numbers have looked like. It's not a common feat, by the way, to have 2,000-yard receivers. That requires a lot of production through the air. It's possible, but it's not necessary in my view. So great question there from Mr. Eddie the Dog. Okay, here's another one about the running backs. This is from Shurtsa, Shurtsa. Take out the R and you got UTSA in there. Okay, so I'm so sorry you're stuck with me. I am just such a doofus. Would love to listen to your thoughts on Dowdell jumping into the number 2 spot as a true freshman. He's talking running back depth chart here. I think Jordan and Whittington are good backs, that being Jordan James and Noah Whittington. But Dante just looked different in the spring game. So I'm with you about Dowdell that he looked ridiculously good. I mean, unusually powerful for a true freshman running back. I could see him surpassing Jordan James and kind of take, and Marcus Harper talked about this on the podcast with Ryan Walk. It just slipped my mind. I'm going to go look it up just like really, really quick. The Mental Sweat Show. He talked about on there how, he could see Dowdell sliding into that Cyrus Habibi-Likio role this year because he does have a college-ready body. He did look really impressive in the spring game. And all the time, I mean, he was a guy that you could tell during the recruiting process, and we discussed it a bit on the show, Carlos Lachlan really wanted this guy. Like, they obviously want all the players who come to Oregon, because if they didn't want him, then they wouldn't take him, of course. But I have gotten the sense before that Dowdell is a guy where they go, yeah, we're really, really glad we got that guy because he looks really good. And he looks explosive. He looks powerful. He had a lot of great things that he showed in the spring game. I'm with you there. I could see him kind of bumping Jordan James out of that goal line back role, or maybe they both do it, or you have a 2-back package with the two of them. Last year, one thing that was really effective for the Ducks when they ran it was a 2 running back backfield with Noah Whittington and Sean Dollars. I could see a 2-back backfield with Bo Nix that consists of Jordan James and Dante Dowdell, because I think those are probably your most powerful runners. Now, Whittington is as well, but I think your short yardage specialists going into this year, look, James was really good at it last year. Don't get me wrong. But has Jordan James to this point looked the way Dowdell did in the spring game? No. Small sample size, but Dowdell looked really, really good. And I think at the very least, he could be as successful as James was a season ago. But I like Jordan James, and I think, stylistically, James and Whittington share a lot of similarities. So I think we could see an even greater running back by committee there with Dowdell coming into the fold. I don't think he goes up to number 2. The reason I don't suspect that's the case is, number one, you don't have somebody there who's like a CJ Verdell type necessarily, where he's good, he is productive, but you see how he could, maybe improve in one form or fashion, or a trait that he's missing here and there. He never had a lot of lateral quickness. He was very much a downhill runner. I think Dante Dowdell is a better version of CJ Verdell. So the thing with Noah Whittington you have to remember is he came from Western Kentucky, where they run an air raid offense. And he over there got acclimated to being a part of the passing game. And what we saw a season ago, at least in the Kenny Dillingham offense, maybe it's different with Stein, is the running backs were regularly involved in the passing game. And though Dowdell is physically ready to get touches, and I'd be surprised if he didn't get at least a decent number or a few touches here and there this season, I would be surprised if the coaching staff looked at him and said, yeah, we feel like we could put you over Noah Whittington, who had an excellent yards per carry average last year, who scored touchdowns, who caught the ball out of the backfield, and who also has a greater understanding of how to play at the collegiate level, right? Because there's more to being a running back than just carrying the football, right? You also have to understand pass protection. And I don't know, and none of us really know, how well Dante Dowdell is progressing on that front. Now, is it rocket science to pick up? Probably not. But when a back is a liability in that sense, it can show, or when it's a strength, it can show in a great way. Underrated moment of last year's that pops into my head: the Bo Nix touchdown on 4th and 2 to Chase Cota in the Holiday Bowl. Bucky Irving, it was cover zero from North Carolina, meaning they were blitzing, I think 7, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, they were blitzing 7 guys and they were going man-to-man coverage, right? It was an all-out assault on Bo Nix. There was a free rusher coming up the middle because there were too many guys for the offensive line to block. And Bucky Irving cut him down and gave Bo Nix the time he needed to make that pass, or else Oregon probably loses that game. And the end of that season really, really stings compared to how it went there after the Georgia game. So I think that those elements, pass catching, pass protection, understanding your assignments in the offense and whatnot, all of that, I think it makes it pretty tough to jump Noah Whittington. But the reason I say I could see Dowdell jumping James, or at least splitting time with him, is because James didn't really do the more complicated stuff a season ago, right? He was just asked to come in short yardage situations and just be a running back. And I think Dowdell is clearly prepared to do that. I mean, that run he had where he's pushing the pile out to, beyond the first down marker for like a 13-yard gain, like, you don't see that from a lot of true freshmen. It is a rare blend of power, speed, and explosiveness for a true freshman. So I'm very high in Dowdell. I think that if Irving goes to the NFL, or Whittington goes to the NFL, or whatever may have you, or if some guy transfers out after this year and Dowdell is then due for a larger role, I feel great about the running backs. But could I see him surpassing Whittington? I don't see that right now, just because Whittington has brought so much to the table. But good observation. I had the same one, and a great question as well. Last one of the week. I don't know why I've got a case of dry mouth today. I don't know. Anyway, this question from Doug. Spencer, I live in Utah now and grew up in Oregon. Hey, that makes 2 of us. And was an athlete back in the day for the Ducks. Let's go. Go Ducks. You may have covered this, but I've been a listener for the past year on a daily basis. Guys in every day are out there. And I'm interested in your background and how you ended up in Utah. Good luck in your future endeavors, and go Ducks. Well, first of all, I appreciate the personal question. Like I say, every time I plug the mailbag here, on YouTube in the comment section, or on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks, you can ask me anything, right? I don't do politics, I don't do religion, but by all means, ask me anything else. So I grew up in Lake Oswego, Oregon, lived there for the first 18 years of my life. My parents live just north of Seattle now, moved there right after I graduated high school. And then I went to college down at a school that has this color. By the way, for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm wearing a red shirt today. It's a Disney shirt. It says home underneath the underneath Cinderella's castle on it. But I went to college in the Bay Area at Santa Clara University. Did not go there for sports broadcasting, by the way. Did not think this was going to be my career at all. I currently have 3 jobs in the sports broadcasting realm. I work for Locked On, hosting Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12. I do a daily hour of sports talk radio on the Fan Sports Network. And then I do TV play-by-play and some other broadcast work for Southern Utah University, which is where I live now. I'm based out of Cedar City, Utah. So I got there by going to college, thinking I wanted to actually go on the political track. I studied political science and Spanish, and I minored in economics. Like, that was the world I wanted to get into. And then I got an internship at Root Sports Northwest, the flagship TV station of the Seattle Mariners. I was there for 10 days. And after those 10 days, I don't even know if it was that long, I decided, like, I have to work in this. I didn't know that was like available, that it was an option, that you could do that. And I was like, if I could work and be around sports all the time, it'd be amazing. And it was the greatest decision I ever made. So then when I went back to college, I became the sports director at the student-run radio station, KSCU. And I did that my senior year. I covered high school football, men's and women's basketball on the radio station, and did sports talk there as well. Then my first job out of college was at Eastern Oklahoma State in Wilburton, Oklahoma, population 2,800. I lived there from April 2020, fun time. That was sarcasm, if that wasn't obvious. April 2020 until August 2021. And then an opportunity came about through a contact of mine who's an assistant women's basketball coach at SUU. Said, hey, we have a broadcast opening here. Was wondering if you'd be interested. I said, yeah, of course. I interviewed. I got the job. I got there. I was originally just coming to Southern Utah to broadcast a few sports. And then after, I'd been here for a couple months, they liked the work I was doing. They said, would you like to just do all of our home broadcasts on ESPN Plus? I said, yeah, of course. And so I just finished up my second season broadcasting for SUU, and I've been broadcasting football, men's and women's basketball, soccer, volleyball, softball, and gymnastics. Yes, gymnastics. So I do a little bit of everything around here for Southern Utah. I absolutely love it. As of now, planning to be back for next year, especially since I just started my radio show in February, which is on the Fan Sports Network in St. George. So my first job at Eastern, that was a cold application that I feel incredibly fortunate. It was an amazing first broadcasting job for me out of college. I got tons of reps, got so much better as an announcer, put together quality demo tape, and was able to parlay that into the opportunity here at SUU. And now I'm just trying to get better all the time. But so that's kind of how I've been around a pretty good amount. I've lived in Oregon, lived in Washington, lived in California, and now I've lived in Oklahoma and Utah as well. But absolutely love it out here. St. George is amazing. It's about less than an hour away from me, and I'm down there every week playing golf. Literally, as you're listening to the show, there is a high probability, if it's Friday morning, that I'm on the golf course as you're in St. George as you're listening to this. So I absolutely love it. And I appreciate the interest, by the way. And I appreciate you all so very, very much. The show has grown beyond what I ever dreamed it could be, honestly. And I hope that we can get to 3,000 subs on YouTube by the fall. So let's make it happen. We're coming up on 2,600. So I think we can get there. Appreciate the question. Keep them coming as always. Again, YouTube comments or Twitter at smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Go play some golf and go Ducks.